superheroes, let me see you take off. I pray you never take your cape off. Even though more time we don't fly straight. But trust me, bro, I promise we gon' die great. Our heavy, but we ain't lightweights. Our parents were legends, they had to migrate. So that's the reason not to sit around and chat. I'm from the super.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Black Tech Unplugged. I'm joined by Jennifer Opal. Hi, Jennifer.
Hi.
Jennifer, I know all the wonderful things that you're doing in the tech space, but for the listeners who might not be aware of what you do, want to just give a brief introduction of yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jennifer Opal. I'm a DevOps engineer at Dropbox. I'm also a technical blogger, a keynote speaker, and a neurodiversity and inclusion advocate, and I'm based in the UK. I wear quite a lot of hats as well. So I also sit on the board of a charity called Neurodiversity in Business, which is based in the UK. And our mission is to work towards helping to make workplaces and organizations as neurodivergently friendly as possible. And during my career, I've won multiple awards, such as the Rising Star Awards at the Black Tech Achievement Awards. I've been named as one of the most influential women in tech in the UK by computerweekly.com from 2019, 2020 and 2021, and so much more. So it's been quite a whirlwind of a career, and quite short, to be honest with you, but it's been great. So that's me.
Yeah, and just think, this is just the beginning of your career, but we're going to touch on some of those hats that you wear, because obviously with so much that you do, we can't touch on everything within the podcast, but we're going to touch on a lot of things. And first thing I want to touch on is your DevOps engineering role. So explain what that truly means to my audience. Like, what do you do on the day-to-day?
Yeah, so DevOps is a lot. I will say that it's quite a lot. And I think that for some people, they have different definitions of what that means. So you may find that for some teams, they might have one definition of it and someone else will have another definition of it. What it is basically a culture. It talks about, it's a practice of looking at ways of improving the ways that the product and the platform of the product is maintained. So for example, we talk about the continuous process. So it contains like continuous integration, continuous development. We create like pipelines, for example, which makes things more efficient in terms of releasing updates to our customers. But we tend to focus on ensuring that we not just think about how to make things more efficient for the customer, but also how to make things more efficient for our developers, working with different teams within the organization. So we sometimes collaborate with the security engineers, we work with platform engineers, it embodies a lot of things, but the essence of it for me, when I think about trying to simplify it as much as possible, is that we work towards ensuring that the platform that the product is running on works as efficiently and as, I always struggle with my words, my dyslexia is dyslexic today. But we work as efficiently as possible to ensure that the quality of the product is of the utmost importance and that the customer receives I'm jumbling my words. I'm so sorry.
You're okay.
Oh my gosh. I'll try and answer that question again. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Sorry, I always struggle with my words. So for a DevOps engineer is responsible for what people might say is development and operations, which is what it does stand for, but it's not necessarily an actual thing. It's more of a culture. And the culture of that is ensuring that you think about the collaboration between the developers and between the operations side of things to work together to ensure that when it comes to the product and the platform that the product runs on, that we are running as efficiently and smoothly as possible so that the customer receives a great experience of using the product every single time. So for example, when you think about the outage that happened last year with Facebook and WhatsApp when they went down. Mm-hmm. That was DevOps. That would have been DevOps on call right there to ensure that they look at fixing the issue, finding out what happened, because that's an infrastructure issue. Mm-hmm. So they had to work together to try and find the issue, try and find out what happened, and ensure that they get a release out to the customers as soon as possible so that they're able to get back on the platform and working with it efficiently. I really hope that makes sense. Because I feel like there's, in my head sometimes as well, I have so many definitions of it and so many ways of explaining it. So sometimes I'll try and explain it in a simple way. Mm-hmm. But even sometimes explaining it in a simple way can sometimes be very difficult for some people that may not have the technical knowledge to really understand my simplified way of saying it. But I hope that makes sense. But I'm happy to expand on it as well, though.
I think it makes sense. And it makes a lot more sense than when people like try to use all the technical jargon and like make it all complicated. If people, it's like the development plus operations, I think a lot of people would stop thinking that DevOps is scary, because that's the kind of like, that's the tone of what DevOps is right now, like the scary thing that only very technical people could be involved in, but you make it sound like relatable, basically.
I think what I try and do is, because also comprehension isn't my strongest thing. Being dyslexic, my comprehension is actually quite poor. So when it comes to explaining things, sometimes even I sometimes struggle to find the words to really be able to help make sense of certain things. So I understand that splitting it between, say, development and operations could help people to understand it better. But I also understand that trying to use technical jargon to try and explain my role will not really help someone that is not technical or familiar with DevOps to really understand what that is. So yeah, I try and simplify as much as possible. It also helps me too.
And you mentioned being dyslexic, but you really identify as neurodivergent. Yes. And I want you to just talk through that a little bit, because the term is coming up, but a lot of people don't even understand what that truly means. So let's define that for anyone listening today.
Of course. So neurodivergent is a way for people that have a brain that is different to everybody else. It's a way of identifying themselves to say, my brain is different to yours. So for example, for myself, I identify as neurodivergent because I have ADHD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia. But neurodivergent is a huge umbrella. So it could be for someone that has autism, Asperger's, ADHD like myself, dyscalculia. There's so many. It's just a way of us saying our brain is different to the neurotypical mind. We think differently. We might need support in certain things. Doesn't mean that we're less capable, doesn't mean that we need someone to kind of put our arm around us and hold us and be like, oh wow, that's so sad. It's really not. It's more so just to say that we think differently and we identify as such, and you're more than welcome. For some people, they like to expand on it further to say exactly what it is that they have, which is what I sometimes do. But sometimes telling people that I have ADHD, dyslexia, and dyspraxia is quite the mouthful. So neurodivergent is a way that many people identify themselves.
Now, how does that affect you in the workplace and for doing your job?
Yeah, so it has its challenges for sure. I think that in the long run, for me, being vocal about being neurodivergent has definitely helped me to ensure that people know that if I'm behaving in a certain way, or if there's certain things that I have done, they can also link it to the way that my brain is. So for example, I struggle with reading. So I use a screen reader called Read and Write, which is what I use to actually read through text, because reading just like that is very, very difficult for me. Mm-hmm. So what I'll find is that for me, using a screen reader, I could read through things so that it's able to help me to articulate things I want to say, or reading documentation helping me with my learning. If there's something new that I've never used before and I have to go through documentation, I'm going to use a screen reader for me to be able to read that. So sometimes because of that, and also because of the way that my brain processes information, which could take longer than someone that's neurotypical, I need additional time to read something and understand something. So that also helps me to be able to say, hey, like, this is how I work and this is the support that I need. And I want to be able to express that to you. So that's helped me to kind of be more comfortable in being neurodivergent in the workplace, and also having a team that's understanding and supportive of that and is able to learn about that from me, but also for themselves too.
Right. And for people who are listening to the episode and they might have someone on their team who is neurodivergent, what are some tips or advice that you have for them to make sure that they are having an inclusive environment? Because that's very key to be successful in the workplace.
Oh, 100%. I think the first thing is not to necessarily make suggestions, but to let them know that it is safe for them to share what support they need. So I know that, like, I remember there was a situation, well, actually not a situation, someone reached out to me and asked me and said that they had a colleague who recently was diagnosed with ADHD, and as a manager, how do I support them? And my response was, let them know that you're there to support them. That's it. Because as someone, when I was first diagnosed with ADHD, this was 2018, early 2018. It was just after I finished my first coding course with Code First Girls. So when I got diagnosed, it came as a shock. And it was like, wow, I've navigated 27, 28 years of my life. And I now have an understanding as to why I am the way that I am, or why I think the way I do, or why when I'm reading certain texts, I can't remember what it is I've actually read, or I'm losing track of what I'm reading, or words are kind of moving around the page. There's reasons now why I have that, but it's also a lifelong thing that I'm going to continue to learn about it. So it might be that there's some things that work for me in one sense, but some things that don't work for me. But I had to go through that process for myself. Someone can make suggestions to me, but I have to kind of go through that process of trialing it for myself first. And also having the support there in terms of, like, when I did get diagnosed by an educational psychologist, they were able to kind of say, these are what we think you could try and use. This is how we think your brain works. Give them a try. But I think the most important thing is just to express to that person that if they need accommodations, if there's anything that they need for support, that they have a safe space to express that. So the key thing is creating the safe space. That is what creates inclusion, and that's what makes them feel comfortable enough to come to you whenever they're ready to share that, and to be able to say, this is what I need, because it also does take them time too. So yeah, create the safe space.
Yes. And also, just based on what you mentioned, it also sounds like being empathetic, right? So being able to, like, listen and take that in. And like you said, you don't have to make suggestions, just listen and understand where I'm coming from, and give me that space give you that space in order to, create an environment that's helpful for you within the workplace.
Absolutely. That's literally right. It's important. Empathy is key. It's not something that loads of people learn, like some people kind of forget that part. For some people, it's just kind of dotting the I's and T's, but empathy is really important, especially when creating spaces of inclusion, because with empathy creates a space of inclusion, but also creates a safe space for your team and for your colleagues to be able to be their full selves in every sense, and not to feel that them being different in terms of how they think and how they are is not something that can be used against them. So there's still a lot of stigmas as well in the workplace, where some people feel that they shouldn't share it because they're scared that by sharing it, it could result in them being dismissed or being treated differently, or that they're well, I refer to it to disabilities for me, but for some people they don't call it disabilities, but to their disabilities might be used as kind of a way to weaponize whether they're good at what they do or not. So for some people, they choose not to share, but I think creating the safe space really does help them.
Yes, and I want to go back and touch on, you mentioned bringing your full self to work, which
Yeah.
is always an ongoing conversation, especially in spaces and beyond. And we've talked about your neurodivergent part of yourself, but there's some intersectionality there because you also are a Black woman in tech. And so in order to bring your full self to work, you also have to bring that piece. So I want to ask, as a Black woman in tech, what has your experience been?
It's definitely been up and down. And I think, like, when I first came into the tech industry, which was in 2019, well, that's when I got my first technical role, it was very apparent that there was a lack of representation, and coming from the UK as well, it's even smaller. So I came to the realization when I was in my previous tech role that I was the only Black person there. And I was working in a head office for a major telecommunications company. And I did call them out on that, you know, in a way where it was respectful and not in the sense to kind of attack, but to just ask the question, why am I the only Black person here? Why is there nobody else? And I did ask that to senior leadership when they came to visit us. And I've shared that story before, and I've done a blog about it, talking about it. And it definitely received a lot of praise within the organization I was working at before and outside of it. And when I brought that question to them, it gave them food for thought, because it was like, we never thought about that. Let's have a conversation. But thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that I had that space, you know. I wasn't made to feel like, how dare you say that to senior leadership or to a CTO, like, who do you think you are? Like, I wasn't made to feel like that at all. But I was invited to the space to kind of have a further conversation about that and what could be done to change it. But you'll find yourself in a lot of spaces where you are the only one, and it can get very lonely. And in terms of the intersectionality of my identity, that's a tongue twister there. I realized there was a layer there, because it wasn't just the fact that I was a Black woman, but also being neurodivergent on top of that. It could be even more lonely sometimes, because you don't have anyone we can kind of connect with, or not seeing someone that looks like you really does put it does have an impact on you and on your mental health. It did get to a point where being the only one led to me being diagnosed with anxiety. After my performance at work started to kind of slip, but I was tokenized heavily also at the same time. So I found myself speaking at events and things like that. But then when it came to the work that I was doing, I found that kind of started to go down, and I started to feel that I wasn't really trusted with responsibility of doing certain tasks and getting them done. And that started to also reflect on my mental health too. But that was the sign where I realized that, yeah, this is time. I need to find somewhere else. But I will say that on the plus side, that me sharing my experiences of where I was before has definitely helped me to find community outside of the workplace, but also just online. I definitely play a huge importance. I place a huge importance on community, because especially when you're in an environment where no one looks like you, community, Twitter, social media, that's literally what you have to find and connect with people that do look like you, so that you can be able to say, hey, nice to meet you, love to get to know you, and just kind of create those friendships, and also be able to have those conversations, be like, hey, someone said this to me and I feel like this. Is it okay for me to feel like this, or am I mad? But sometimes it's like, no, you're not mad. It's okay to feel like that. And it helps sometimes, because sometimes you'll be in your own head so much, creating this whole narrative, that you don't realize that what you're feeling is actually valid, because there's no one else around you to validate that. So yeah, there's definitely been advantages and disadvantages for sure. But I'm grateful that I've been able to express the disadvantages and be supported in those disadvantages, because then they're able to kind of learn from my experience to make things better for the next person that comes in that has similar experiences to me. So yeah, I would say that.
I want to touch on. So first, start with round of applause for your company for when you did speak up, because a lot of times there's some retaliation that comes with speaking.
Oh yeah.
So it's hard. So round of applause that they actually allowed you to like speak your truth. There was no retaliation or like go sit in the corner over there. So happy to hear that. I have to talk about being tokenized though, because sometimes I feel like we skip over it on the podcast, and it's probably time to talk about it in a little bit more detail. So one, I want to just have us take a moment to define what that means. But two, I also want to give like, if we could give like an example of two of what that actually looks like in the workplace, because I think people are being tokenized, especially after everything that happened with George Floyd. And we just don't talk about it and like how to navigate that situation. So let's go over that.
Yeah, so the definition like for tokenism is basically when someone, an individual or a group of people are used to, in a performative or a symbolic way, in order to give the appearance of something that's existing but not actually existing. That's how I define it. So, for example, you may find that you are contacted during Black History Month to speak about something, but it's because you're the only Black person there. Or it might be that it's International Women's Day and you're the only, they need more women to talk about a particular thing, and they might reach out to you because there's no other women of color. So they might reach out to me because I'm a Black woman, and they just realized they haven't reached out to any other women of color to come on stage or talk about their experiences. Other situations might be if you've been invited to speak at an event and it focuses on a particular group and they don't allow you to kind of speak about the intersectionality of your identity deeply. So it might be, for example, I'm using International Women's Day a lot, but that's what I've got on top of my head. If you've been invited to, let's say you've been invited to speak for International Women's Day, but we know that there's a difference of experience between the experience of a white woman and the Black woman. And a Black woman will come in and share their experience as a Black woman because that's their experience. But you might find that you have to you're kind of given kind of like some subliminals, or there's like a body language that you're picking up where it's like, I don't think they want me to talk about me being Black. They want me to just talk about being a woman. They're trying to be like, don't bring race into this. So you might find situations like that. And in other situations, it might be that you've been asked to be a part of a campaign for an organization, and it's like a marketing thing, and they're going to put you on social media to give the impression that there's diversity here and there's an inclusive environment here. But then you join the company and then you realize that that person left a year ago or something like that. And they're still using their image to promote this image that there's an inclusive environment here. It happens a lot. It really, really does. And I even had a situation like that myself. Like before joining Dropbox, I was looking for jobs, and I had someone that was a founder of a startup reach out to me, and I went on the website, and there was someone on the page that I recognized who was a Black person. And then I reached out to them and they told me they never worked there. They just volunteered there for something, but allowed them to use their image for their website, for their startup. But this person was approaching me to work there. So when I was like, what? Why would you let them do that? because you didn't even work there. You were there for an event that you volunteered for.
Right.
Yeah. And I was just like, why would you let them do that? You know? And it was just like, it was a shock to me, but I realized just how tokenism really does play a part in a lot of things, not just in terms of, you know, the brand image of an organization, but also just in terms of the misleading people into thinking that there's something here when they're really, it's not what they're saying that it is. So it can kind of mislead a lot of people to end up joining a lot of organizations. And tokenism doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I feel like a lot of businesses and needs to get to know that, because the same people that you're hiring will leave within 6 months. You'll be lucky to have them for more than a year, because you've misled them to believe that there's a particular environment for them to expect, and it's not what you have relayed it to be. So when they leave, you really can't be surprised. You misled them to joining you in the first place. So yeah, I can go on about this for a while. I told you, my ADHD goes on tangents.
Listen, it's okay though, because we need to, because I mean, so we know that marketing campaigns for some of these companies are, you know, some of it is like falsified. A lot of them are using stock photos because they don't have any people of color within their organization. But to find out that a company has used someone's photo from an event they had, that is bad. Like, you aren't even starting, even if, let's just say they're poaching you and they want you to come to the company, you're already starting on like a false foundation, like a foundation that's not solid, that's not real. Like, this is not how we should be doing things, especially in 2022. Like, you've had time to change.
Exactly. It's a shame. And I think that what a lot of organizations don't understand is that honesty is the most important thing. Yeah. I would rather you be honest than for you to mislead me into coming and applying for your organization and going through the Lord knows how many interviews to get to this point of an offer, only for me to join. And it's like, why am I Black History Month? Like, why is it just me? Because your recruitment video didn't tell me that. Right. But I remember when I first joined Dropbox, and I was going through the interview process for that, and I had my first chat with my now manager, and he expressed it from the jump. And he said that you will be, if you decide to join, you will be the only Black woman in the engineering for now. From that point, that was last year, I would have been the only Black woman. And the fact that he was honest about it was how I knew that this is somewhere that I needed to be, because there's not a lot of organizations that will tell you that from the jump. Right. They will tend to keep that from you. But the fact that they vocalized that to me and gave me the decision to say, do you want to join this? Do you want to be a part of this? And he said to me that, you know, you will be the only Black woman in engineering and on our team specifically as well. However, we are aware of that. And we are looking at ways to improve that. We are looking at ways to change that and to reach out to those groups to bring them to join Dropbox and to join HelloSign as a whole. And this is before I even was like gonna start the interview process. He gave me that information up front and gave me time for me to think about it. And that's something that's not heard of a lot. Well, at least I've never heard it. But for me, as someone that was coming from a place where I wasn't informed about it, and then going to a place where they actually do talk about it, that told me that inclusion is something that's practiced here. Yeah. And that gave me the decision to be like, let me go through the interview process, let's do this. Because the fact that you're honest about it and you're holding yourself to account, and the company's holding them to account, this is somewhere that I feel like I can thrive and somewhere I can learn and be myself fully. And it's not like I'll be in a situation where no one can see my race. I will very much be a Black woman that will wear wigs one day and be bold the next. It's just how I am. Like, that's just how it is.
Exactly. And you don't need anybody asking, like, how did your hair change overnight? Just accept it and let me be.
Yeah, like, if anything, I just get compliments like, love the hair today. Thank you. That's it. There's no need for no, Inspector Gadget investigation. It's just, it is what it is. Thank you and good day.
Exactly. And I want to touch on that so you mentioned honesty being as back in the day, they used to say honesty is the best policy. Mm-hmm. And it truly is, because look at even your experience. Them being honest from jump allowed you to go through the process because you were able to make the decision.
Exactly.
So, like, honesty and trust are like two of the biggest things that a company can have. And for some reason, not all companies have it, which is kind of weird to like say out loud. But
it is
what it is. But it's like, if anyone's listening and you are CEO or HR of a company, honesty and trust, that's all we're looking for out here.
Absolutely. And it helps in so many ways, because when you are honest with your colleagues and honest with people, with candidates applying to join the organization, it's something that can then be ingrained into the culture of the organization, because that creates trust also within the teams. Mm-hmm. Like, if you're honest with the candidates coming in, you're also honest with the teammates that you're with your colleagues, you respect them, so you're able to be honest with them. It does come into the culture of a team and of an organization. It gives a good impression when you are honest. I would rather someone tell me there's no other Black people working at this startup, or there's no other Black people in this engineering team. Tell me up front. Don't let me find out when I sign the offer and I come in on my first day. Right. That is the worst part, because it's not just about the fact that you're not honest about it. It's the fact that you don't see it. Right. So if you don't see it, that is also a huge red flag if you don't see that. Yeah. Because it's like, is it that you're not acknowledging the issue? Or is it the fact that you don't see race, quote unquote? Is it that you don't want to acknowledge that? Are you uncomfortable talking about race? What is it? What is the discomfort with that? But it is so key and so important. So you might find some candidates be like, I don't want to be the only Black person here. Thank you for letting me know, but it's not for me. But you might find other people, like for me, where they've said that, and I'm like, I love the fact that you said that. That says a lot about the culture. I'd like to go through the interview process and see how it goes. But honesty is so important. Yeah. Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about your current role at Dropbox, but I do want to dig back to like your very beginning in tech. And so I want to ask, how did you even get into tech? I know you mentioned taking a boot camp, but for the listeners who don't know, I will let you tell your story there.
Sure. So it started in 2017. And I was in, was it 2017? Yeah, it was. I was in my second year of my degree, which I've since dropped out of. I'm so upset by that. I have to pay that money back. But still, I wish I had a receipt, but too late. So I got onto a program, and it was a program that was free for women and non-binaries. And the program was basically an effort to introduce women and non-binaries to learning how to code. And it's a social enterprise called Code First Girls. And they are based in the UK. I'm not sure if they do international courses, but you're more than welcome to go and have a look. And they are an amazing organization, and they were collaborating with a lot of universities to bring this course, which is like once a week, a web development course, just to give you an introduction into what coding is and how to build with it. That was my first intro to code. It was once a week for 8 weeks, and I absolutely loved it. And I was really kind of like asking myself, why did no one tell me about coding before? And unfortunately, I just realized that I just didn't have that around me. There was no one around me that was an engineer or software engineer. I didn't have doctors or lawyers in my family. Like there was no one that did that. So I didn't see what I could be. So how would I know about it? And then after that course was done, I tried to learn on my own, but being the neurodivergent brain that I am, I'm incredibly indecisive. So I went from thinking, oh, I think I want to be a data scientist. I started learning Python, and I started doing playing around with like some data sets on Kaggle, learning about machine learning on Udacity and on Kaggle as well. Bought a Udemy course, and obviously the majority of those things were left incomplete because that's just how ADHD is. We go on a dopamine high, and then when we get bored, we just kind of, it plummets. We get bored, we just move on. And I went from that to thinking that I wanted to do build websites, and I did a free code camp course, started that, got bored, and then I just kept jumping around trying to think about where I wanted to be. And then I also got overwhelmed by the immense amount of information that was out there from people saying, oh, don't learn Python because blah, 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 learn JavaScript instead. Don't learn JavaScript, learn C#, And I would be jumping around trying to learn all these different languages and not really knowing why. So then during that time, the following year in 2018, Code First Girls collaborated with a major telecommunications company in the UK to produce the Further program, which is now called the Nano degree. And it was a full-time immersive program to not just teach women how to code, but also give them an opportunity to create a portfolio, go through the interview process for a job role. So I got onto that program, and it started in October 2018. And I was in my final year of my degree, which I was already failing because I was doing a degree in business and French language. I had uni from 6 p.m. to 9 p.m. in the evenings, Monday to Friday, like 3 or 4 nights a week. And then in the days, I had the full-time program, 9 to 5. And I had to do them both because the program itself was unpaid. So I was like, I don't know if I'm going to get the job or not. And I don't know if I'm going to get the good degree or not. So I'm going to have to do both. And as I was going through the program, they introduced us to front-end web development again, agile methodologies. What else did we do? Testing, I think. And I can't remember. And then Python, we just learned the basics, the foundation, the fundamentals of Python as well. And at the end of the program, we had all these projects that we had to complete in order for us to qualify for interviews. So I finished mine, and I was qualified for the interviews, and I got offered a job. And I had to make a decision: do I stay in uni and finish my final year, or do I take this job and drop out of uni and fly off to Belfast in Northern Ireland? And I decided to fly off to Belfast in Northern Ireland and drop out of uni. It's the best decision I've made. I've never lived outside of England before, and I've never been to Northern Ireland. But you know, it was a great experience, and absolutely loved it. It was a beautiful country, great scenery. And that's where I started my career as a junior software engineer, working specifically in testing. And then an opening came up in another team for the big data team. So then I moved in to join their team and was offered a position with them as a DevOps big data engineer. So at the time it was just big data engineering, but then they started to try and look at changing their workflows to integrate DevOps, the practice of DevOps into that. And then I joined Dropbox last year, and that's that.
So I have to ask, because I know as a Black woman, our parents aren't just happy when we just drop whatever we're doing, and they think that we should be getting these degrees. So what did your parents say when you said, okay, I'm going to do this boot camp or this program, and then after the program you say, oh, well, actually I'm going to move over here to Northern Ireland and take this job?
Yeah, I think like when it came to telling my mom,
Mm-hmm.
She was really supportive. She didn't really understand what it is that I did. She just heard engineer.
Yeah.
And as a Congolese parent, that's all you need to hear, you know?
Yeah.
That's it. She heard engineer, goes, oh, engineer, okay. And she just told everyone, when I got onto the program, she's like, yeah, she's gonna be an engineer. I remember one time she called me and she was like, what's your job again? And I'm like, software engineer. She's like, okay. And then she hung up and just called all her friends and siblings and stuff. I'm sorry, I'll have to pause.
Oh.
I'm sorry about that. I had a coughing fit.
Well, no worries.
But I'll answer that question again if that helps. Where was I? Yes. So when I told my mom about getting onto the coding program, or even getting the job even, she was really supportive, and she was just like, she didn't understand what it is that I did. So as a Congolese parent, when you hear engineer, that's all you need. Like, that's all you need to hear. She doesn't need to really understand what we do. She's just like, oh, you're an engineer. Wow, my daughter's an engineer. I'm like, yep. And then she just like, I remember when I got the job and she was just so happy and she was celebrating, and she went and called everyone in the family. I don't even think I got to tell my brothers before my mom got to them first. I was just like, yep, I got the job. You know, you already know, but just wanted to say. But everyone was really proud of me. Moving to Belfast, I think that she was a bit nervous in a sense where me moving to another country, we don't know anybody out there, so I can understand she's a bit worried about that. And a funny story where there was a day where I didn't answer the phone for like a day, and she called the police.
Well, I feel like that's the average Black parent response to things. If you do not answer the phone after a day, I feel like most parents are calling the police. I don't know what it's about, but more often than we would like to admit.
Yeah, I think like she was just really worried, and I don't think it was even a day. I think it was like half a day. And I remember my phone was on silent because I didn't realize it was on silent. And my brother called me. He's like, Jen, what are you doing? I'm like, what? Because like, mom's been calling you, like mom's crying, like we called the police and everything. I'm like, I beg your pardon. So I called my brother, I called my mom, I'm like, don't cry, I'm okay. And then as I made my way back home, I get a call from, because they gave them my number, and I get a call from a police officer, goes, you all right? I'm like, yeah, because this is PC, etc., etc. I'm like, okay. And they said, your mum called to tell me you were missing. I'm like, I'm not. They're like, we know. And they were like, I'm not missing that yet. We hear that. We just wanted to just check sure you're all right. And like, yeah, we're fine. And they're really nice about it. They found it quite funny. I think, you know, I don't know why they found it funny, but they kind of did. And I got home, and then after about half an hour, I get a knock on the door and the police officers are there. Just want to check, and they're like, just want to check you're not missing, you know, I just want to check you're not missing. I'm like, I'm not missing. And like, good, just wanted to check in on you. It was just like, they had like a really strong Northern Irish accent. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But they were really nice, really friendly, and I made sure never to do that again. But it was great. But she was very supportive of me. I think she gave me the space to kind of figure out what it is I wanted to do, because I was always so indecisive about what I wanted to do, but I was able to find somewhere where I could be creative. And that's what I was really desiring, is a career that would allow me to be creative and to also try different things. And I found that in coding, and found that in tech, and I never expected to, because it wasn't something that I'd seen.
Right. And again, that goes back to what you mentioned of you didn't even know that was an option because you hadn't seen anyone do it. And
exactly.
Actually leads me to another thought. So from a UK perspective, and like your whole experience, do you see programs around tech starting at a younger age, so being geared towards younger individuals so that we can start young? Like we have Black Girls over here for young girls, but is it the same in the UK now?
I'm not sure about I'm not sure about primary schools. Primary school in the UK is from the age of, I believe it's 6 up until the age of 11, I think. And then we have high school, which is from the age of 11 to 16. So I think I have been seeing programs in the sense where, for example, we have Coding Black Females that I believe collaborated with the school very recently to introduce them to coding, and I believe it was game development. And Coding Black Females is founded by Charlene Hunter, who won an OBE from the Queen earlier this year. So she's doing amazing work. And I love Coding Black Females because that was the first place where I gave a talk. It was the first place where I actually gave a talk. But they've done incredible work and done some amazing programs. So I'm familiar with STEMettes. I'm not sure if they teach coding, but I know that they do work with a lot of young girls, introducing them to STEM subjects. And I believe coding is one of the topics, but I'm not completely sure on that one. But I am finding that the conversation is being had and that action is coming with it. So it's not necessarily just, oh, we should do something about it. It's more so like, I want to do something about it. Will you give me the money to be able to create this program for these students, or to fill the gap of bringing in more women and non-binaries into tech, et cetera, et cetera. So there are programs there and the work is being done. Still a long way to go though, I will say that. But programs like the nano degree that I did with Code First Girls is just a really incredible program to get not just women to just do a coding program and just go, but also do a coding program, complete the projects, and you could interview for a job that will pay you, you know, for your skill set. So I think we need more programs like that, not just in the UK, but also in the US too, because a lot of people do reach out to me for programs like that, and I don't know where to find them, and I don't know if they exist. So yeah, it's a long way to go, but the work is there.
Yes, definitely a long way to go, because if it wasn't a long way to go, then our diversity numbers will look a whole lot different.
Exactly.
And Jennifer, we talked about a lot today, and I do want to wrap up the conversation on a few different topics. First one, I want to go back to DevOps. So you made the transition from DevOps after doing some junior dev work. If anyone who's listening to the podcast now wants to transfer over to a DevOps engineer, what tools do you recommend that they learn? And then also, like, what processes, or I guess what other additional knowledge would they need to know to be successful as a DevOps engineer?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to understand what DevOps is. I think that sometimes people, when they do want to ask the question that I want to be a DevOps engineer, and then they'll then ask me, what is a DevOps engineer? So I think that the first key thing, excuse me, the first thing is know what DevOps is and understand what it is. Because I think that some people think that it's like, it's not, because it's not simply just development and operations. There's so much more to that. And that's why I sometimes struggle to explain it. But it's something that you need to look into first. You may find YouTube videos. LinkedIn Learning has a DevOps Foundations course that you can do. I don't know if it's free or not, but you can have a look and see. Udemy may have some DevOps Foundations courses too, but definitely look into DevOps first. There's so many different tools that you can look at. Some I would say is to look at the cloud. Cloud is something that we use in DevOps, so whether it be AWS, using EC2, for example, familiarize yourself with understanding the services that can be used within DevOps. So EC2 tends to be a good place for you to start. And AWS Learning has a lot of foundational courses and some project ideas for you to kind of familiarize yourself with that tool. Something that a lot of people sleep on is Linux, which is something that I also struggle with. So learning about the command line would be really, really useful. I use that more and more on my day-to-day, especially when I'm working on projects. The command line will be used in some way. And it's okay to not know everything about it, because even for me, I don't know everything about the command line. I struggle too. I Google all the time. What else can I suggest? And I would say pick a programming, like, because the programming language side of things is where I struggle, because I came to this role with Python and having an understanding of Python, but then I had to learn about making shell scripts. I had to learn about using Ruby, because we use Puppet, which is another tool that we use to manage our workflows as well. So it's a big one. So I would say from the top, learn about the cloud, familiarize yourself with the tool, pick a programming language, whether it be Python. I would go for that, because I guess it's something that's easy accessible, and possibly also look at learning about the command line and learning how to use that. But give yourself time and give yourself grace, because the tech stack in DevOps is huge. And what I use here, like I'm using Jenkins, I'm using Puppet, I'm using Sumo Logic, I'm using Grafana for monitoring the service, and we create dashboards. So that could also be another project, actually, creating dashboards for an EC2 instance to monitor the server. That's just one thing I can think of off the top of my head, because we do use monitoring tools to monitor our service and monitor the performance of it, so that if there's an outage or it's at the brink of becoming out, or something's about to happen, we can run in there and fix it, you know? But the cloud, the command line, and Python, I would say those three. And it's okay to not know every single tool in DevOps, because you will not know. I do not know. Give yourself grace and give yourself time to just understand those things. And you don't have to learn it to a point where you are completely fluent with it, because that's going to take years. And I think that if you start small, maybe start with AWS first, and then make your way up from there. And DevOps isn't just about, like, there's also other roles within DevOps too. It's not just DevOps engineers. You have security engineers, you have SRE, so site reliability engineers, you've got platform engineers. And when I say like learning Python, I pick Python because that's the language that I know that there's a lot of resources for. You can learn Ruby if you want to, which would be helpful if you end up using Puppet in whatever team you join, but you might find that they don't use Puppet. It's also possible. I could recommend Java, but I know that for some people, Java, it's just, there's Java, there's C#, there's so many languages, and there's an influx of info. So pick one language and stick with it. Loads of people will be like, stop learning Python, learn Ruby instead, learn C# instead. Don't do that, because as someone that was trying to learn on their own, I ended up going into different languages and learning nothing. So yeah, because it's a lot, because like you find that, okay, I'm learning Python, but someone is telling me not to learn Python. Someone's telling me to learn JavaScript instead, for example. Right. So I'll stop learning Python and I'm kind of starting from the beginning to learn another language. And then I'm kind of left confused. I'm not sure what projects to do or things like that. But I find that Python is a language that can be used in projects that you decide to do on the cloud, projects that you decide to do using the command line or creating some scripts, for example, however you want to proceed with that. But I would say those things. I think, yeah, I rambled a lot. I do that a lot.
I think it's very helpful for anyone who's listening to the podcast. And I appreciate that you mentioned give yourself grace with tech. I think everyone wants to like speed demon through things, and like you have to be an expert on everything. Give yourself grace, give yourself time. Tech evolves every single day.
Every day.
So you have to be like a lifelong learner if you're actually going to be successful in tech.
Oh, 100%. And I think that's why when it comes to explaining, when someone asks the question, how do I become a DevOps engineer? It's sometimes really hard to explain because there's so many tools. And if I am overwhelmed sometimes as a DevOps engineer, how do I tell someone who wants to become one where to start if I'm still overwhelmed by everything that I have to learn? And sometimes I'll be learning something and then the tech stack changes and be like, oh, we've decided to look at this instead because of this security issue, or we find it doesn't integrate well with this tool that we use. It's going to be always changing. So that's why I said that the key thing is to learn about what DevOps is and what that involves. Learn about the CI/CD pipelines. Learn what continuous integration is, continuous deployment is. Learn about those processes, because that's what's going to be the key for you to understand what DevOps is. And then from there, you can move on to learning about AWS and the tools. And AWS Learning has a lot of projects that you can look at on the website. Then you can look at learning a language, learning Python. Free Code Camp, I believe, has a Python learning pathway. And then you can go on to practicing, trying to do those projects on AWS, for example, doing it on the command line instead. Look at trying to set up AWS, the command line, on your laptop and set that up, and then trying to use Linux to kind of be able to work with the instances on whatever, let's say on EC2, for example. Instances is basically servers that are basically running different services. So you might have a server that's running Grafana, you might have another one that's running Jenkins, for example. I can kind of go on from that and ramble a bit, but it's a big topic. There's a lot to learn with DevOps. It's not impossible to learn, but because there's so much in it, you need to give yourself the time and the patience to understand what DevOps is, and then to be able to work from there. But if you don't understand it fully from head on, it's also okay, because you will always continue to learn. And the best way to learn is also to practice. So as you start to practice and apply things that you're learning from understanding what DevOps is, you'll start to see and understand it better. But yeah, I hope that makes sense. I really do.
At least it makes sense to me, and I'm not a technical person. It's all about thinking of it like a puzzle. So like keep getting the pieces, which would be the different, applications or different tools, and keep building until you finally figure out that puzzle. And each puzzle is going to look different just because DevOps is done differently at different organizations. So
100%. Like when doing DevOps here at HelloSign, completely different to how I was doing it in the previous organization I was working for. But then again, we were trying to apply the DevOps culture to big data engineering, which is different to what I'm doing now. I'm definitely not working with any big data tools. So it's definitely a switch, but I understood and had a basic understanding of what DevOps was. But then as I'm starting to learn and develop in my skill set and in my career here at Dropbox and with the HelloSign team, I'm starting to understand things. I'll be like, okay, I understand what that means in terms of, okay, this is what you mean by the pipeline. This is what you mean by the server. This is what you mean by this and by that. It all kind of connects, but it'll slowly connect. And I'm still putting the pieces together. So yeah, it takes time, and it won't be an overnight thing. And you don't necessarily, like I said, have to go for just a DevOps role. There are so many different roles within DevOps that you can look at, that you might find is also fit for you too.
Yes. So, yeah. Yes, I always like that when people offer other options because we always feel like we have to be in this box. And we don't have to be in a box. There's many, many, many tech roles out there. So do what you feel comfortable with and do what is best for you.
100%. And don't focus on the salary. Oh my gosh.
Oh.
I see, I know that we've gone over time, haven't we?
I mean, we can keep going for a little bit.
One thing that I find is I understand that for some people, they might pick a role because they've seen an article saying how much you could potentially earn with that role.
Yeah.
Don't go just for that. When you try and pick something and you're only focusing on how much you can potentially earn, I think that could also it can come back to bite you a little bit. Think about not just the role, because there's so many roles in tech that could pay you a lot, but that's also very, very limited as well, because it depends on where you are. In the UK, you're not going to make 6 figures for a role. I just want to make that abundantly clear, because in the UK, we don't offer location-based salaries. So we don't offer salaries based on the living costs. They can basically just give you what they want as long as it's above minimum wage. So where I was working in my last role, I was making £30,000 a year. That was my salary for a software engineer. And that's normal, it's common, for many roles. But don't just focus on the role itself. So when you do research roles and thinking, I want to find something that I like, you might find that, okay, I want to do DevOps. I don't know what that is, but I know that it pays well. That's when you look into be like, what is DevOps? Ask the question. Because asking questions about that role helps, but also it will be something that you bring in to the workplace. It's important to ask questions.
Yes.
When you don't understand something, you ask questions. Yes. If you can't research something for yourself outside of a workplace, that's not good. It's not a good thing. You have to make an effort to also research on your own. It really, really shows. Because if, for example, you want to apply for a role and it's a junior role, but you don't know what the role really entails, you then ask someone for a referral, but then you ask them what the role is about, they're not going to refer you, because you've basically just said, I want to apply for this role in the hopes that you referring me will help me get this job. Right. But I don't really have the range to be applying for this job. So then you're allowing that person to put their name on the line to say, hey, I want to recommend this person. But then they look at the CV of that person and be like, why would you recommend this person? And then you find that they don't, when it comes to that person referring other people, it then affects other people, because they might be like, oh, that person referred that person who didn't meet the criteria at all. And it had an impact on, we're not sure whether you should look at their other referrals. So it can have an impact on other people too. But just take the time to research roles. Also, it's okay to not code. It is absolutely fine to not want to code. There are also roles within DevOps where you don't need to code. There are consultancy roles too, where you don't have to code. You can just give your ideas and you can give your opinions on certain things and express your ideas in terms of saying, maybe go for this tool or that tool, whatever. You can offer consultancy. You can look at sales. There's so many different areas, but you don't have to code if you don't want to. So give yourself time to research the roles. Yes, they're paying a lot, particularly in the US, but it's also okay to say that you don't want to code. It's also okay to say you don't enjoy it. And it's okay to find a role that suits you, that still pays well. It exists.
Yes, but I totally agree about, do not chase money. It's not going to end well. It never ends well. Even though in your mind, you might be set for a few months with this like high salary, but it's not going to end well. So don't chase. I know everybody says chase the bag, but don't chase the bag. I think you should attract the bag.
Yeah, because I think like when you are, like when you enjoy doing something, you not just, it doesn't just show, like, you don't have to be passionate about a role, like, you don't have to be passionate about it, but there needs to be an interest in what you're doing. When you're not interested in what you're doing, it will show. There's only so much and so long that you can hide that you're not interested in this job. It will reflect in your performance. So you have to ensure that when you are learning something, you are interested in it. You know, I'm interested in DevOps. And the reason why I like it is because there's so many different tools. And the way that my brain operates is that I get bored so quickly that I like the fact that I can jump around and do different things using different tools, like, all the time. I like that. That's how my brain operates. For some people, the tech stack is too big. They're not really into that. They don't want to work on the back end. They want to work on the front end. They don't want to work, they want to work with the cloud more compared to using another tool, for example. You'll find that there's certain things that they enjoy. And that's okay, you know, but definitely think about that as you are looking for roles. Don't just chase, like you said, don't just chase the bag. Don't just focus on, oh my gosh, this is paying X amount, I want to do this. There are loads of different roles that are paying X amount. But find a role that interests you. You know, you don't necessarily have to be passionate about it, but enjoy it. Be interested about it. Be fascinated by it. Be eager to want to learn more about it. It shows and it helps. And it also helps you because then, because you're enjoying it, you're pushing yourself to continue to learn about that tool more and more. And then you're able to kind of express that, you know, whether it be through projects, whether it be through social media, whether you're creating a blog or doing a technical blog to break down a project you're working on, you want to enjoy it. It'll show that you enjoy it. And that's why a lot of people working in the tech space and engineering, for example, they might be like knowledgeable about the cloud, but they're really interested by it. And then they focus on that and they specialize in that and they teach about that. And that's all they need to teach about because they really do enjoy just the cloud and that's it. And that's okay. So yeah, don't get overwhelmed or bogged down by the some various different roles, but take the time to just understand what's involved and what that job entails.
Yep. And I think the word that we're missing, like within that grouping, is also the curiosity. And I think that's basically what you've been trying to say of like,
yeah.
ask the questions. I feel like sometimes, and I don't know why, but when we're in the workplace, especially as Black people, we are so afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
We will not know what something means and we will hold on for dear life to not ask the question because I guess like fear of looking like we don't know something. Like there's a lot of different factors that go into it, but ask all the questions because everybody will ask you all the questions. So you ask everybody all the questions.
Oh, that happens to me. I still have that to this day.
Really?
Something, oh, 100%. For me, the type of person that I am, yes, like I think that the impression that I give is that I know everything. I do not. I do not. And I think it's important for me to say that because I want people to understand that I'm also still learning too.
Right.
I know as much as I can. I know what I'm doing, but there's also things that I don't know. Right. There's also some things that I struggle to explain. And sometimes it's like, if you were to ask me, oh, like, can you demonstrate DevOps? I will probably be better at demonstrating what it is I do rather than explaining it. You know, I'm like that. In meetings, if something is coming up and everyone, you know, is talking about using a tool or something that I never heard of, I'll just be like, let me just write down this tool. It's called Artifactory. What in the world is Artifactory? And I could really ask that in the meeting, be like, could you explain what Artifactory is? But in my head, I'm like, oh no, I don't want people thinking that I'm dumb. So let me just write it down, you know, and I'll Google it later on. It's okay to ask questions. And although I do get, you know, they do say, ask questions. I'm in an environment like that where they're always like, if you need help, don't be afraid to ask. If you have a question, ask the question. There's no question that's too dumb. That's something that they always say. But in my head, I overthink things and I just don't ask sometimes. But it also kind of it becomes something that's to my detriment too, because then I miss out on learning something quicker, because I'm kind of not asking the question, and I'm kind of sat by myself being like, oh my gosh, I don't know what this is, or I don't know what I'm doing, or things like that. And I do have those moments. But asking questions is so, so important, not just when you're learning, but also as you're growing in your career. Yeah. It's important to ask questions. That helps you learn. And when you have a team, the team that I have is amazing, and they've done some incredible things in their careers. You have access to someone with an immense amount of knowledge. Ask the question. I'm speaking to myself too, I'm kind of like speaking to myself and give myself a pep talk. But yeah, it's asking the question is so important. It really is, and it helps you in the future. Asking the question is how I got to where I am now, and I'm also asking questions on Twitter too, all the time. Like sometimes there'll be something that I just don't know, and I'll ask the question. And you would think that someone that's won awards and been featured, and like I've been featured in The Guardian, I've been interviewed on the BBC, I spoke about my awards earlier as well. You would think that someone like that doesn't need to learn or know anything else. No, I am still learning, because there are people that are more knowledgeable than me, and they have knowledge to share. So I'm going to ask them the question, could you share your knowledge in this area? Because that's what community is about, and that's what your tech career is about. You're going to learn, and you learn by asking questions, and you grow by asking questions.
Right. And a couple points I want to make just based on what you mentioned. First off, I think a lot of times we hold people on a high pedestal. We are all human. There's no way that I can know every single thing that is possible. I might know a lot, but I don't know every single thing. And I think we need to keep that in mind. Like, if I go pinch you, you're going to feel this pinch. Like, we are human beings, and we need to stop having this expectation that someone knows everything, or, they're this deep expert. Two, also is around questions. Sometimes there's other people in the room who also don't know what's going on. So they're probably writing down, like you said.
Yeah.
By you asking the question, you kind of take that burden off of someone else. And so I also think of it that way. But the third point and most important point is it's all a process. Yes. I honestly just got to the point where I was like asking questions whenever I have one, because sometimes, like you said, you get that kind of like analysis paralysis where you're like, oh, should I ask this? Is this going to be appropriate? Are they going to think I don't know? Yes. Guess what, girl? Everybody is Googling at work. So a lot of people
100%.
So you are not alone. Don't be afraid to ask your question, but also recognize it's a process. Not everyone is extroverted or outgoing enough to just say, hey, I have a question. Can you answer this? But sometimes you have to pull it out of yourself and be your own advocate and your own cheerleader to be like, hey, yeah, I could ask this question. It's going to be okay. And also, though, I think it depends on the environment you're in, if you feel safe and comfortable to do that. So there's a lot of factors that go into all of this. So
100%. Like, it's definitely not a one size fits all situation when it comes to asking questions. And I think that also kind of opens another, like, because for me, I asked myself that, like, where I was previously, because I found that I didn't really ask questions. And I had to ask myself, why? Why did I not feel that I could ask questions? Is it the environment or is it me? And it could be both. Do I need, to look at finding someone that I can lean on? Is there someone in the team that you're kind of cool with, that you can kind of message like on Slack or something to say, hey, like, did you hear this? Do you understand this? Could you like jump on a Zoom call with me to explain it or something like that? Or can I tell you what I think I heard or what I think I understand about it? And can you tell me if I'm right? And then if it's the case where it's like there's the one that you feel comfortable reaching out to ask those questions, that's another question to ask yourself. Why is that? Is it them or is it you? Is it the environment? Do you not, like, what is it? The questions come back again. But I definitely understand that it definitely depends on the culture, and that the environment is inclusive and safe for you to be able to ask those questions. If that if the environment isn't safe or made to feel safe for you to be able to ask a question and not feel that you're going to be judged by it, then that could also, I can understand how that would have an impact on you not wanting to just ask the question. It makes sense. But then you'd have to ask the question about whether you feel that you'd be able to grow in your career in an environment like that. And whether it's like, you need to look at maybe looking for creating a community outside of work, or having a network or a mentor, having someone that you can kind of speak to help you in your growth, or whether to just focus it on, maybe it's just the environment, it's just not for me. I don't feel comfortable here. I don't feel like I can be my full self here. I might have to start looking at somewhere else to go. That's also okay too.
Yes, and love that you brought up those questions, because sometimes you just got to check yourself.
You do. And I do that to myself all the time. If I'm asking myself the question, why do I not feel comfortable asking the question? Sometimes it's just me overthinking, because the environment, they make me feel like you can ask the question, you know, if you ever want to ask the question, don't be afraid to ask, reach out if you need help. That's the kind of culture that I have within the team. So if I feel wary, it's normally just most of the time it's normally just me overthinking or being too nervous about asking the question because I'm scared of judgment. And I think that comes naturally to a lot of people, particularly those from underrepresented group, and definitely for me as a Black woman.
Yes, it's more common than you think, everyone. So ask all the questions is the is the conclusion of this portion of the conversation. But Jennifer, we've talked about a ton.
I know.
And so the final question that I want to ask you is if there's anything that we didn't cover, or do you have any final tips or advice and wisdom for anyone listening to the podcast?
Yes, I would say be wary of people charging you for coffee chats for no reason. When I say that, I mean, what I've noticed is that a lot of the time with social media, there's more of a rise of people charging money for things that they don't have knowledge about. Ooh. So sometimes you'll find that people will be like, oh, like, pay me this amount and I will teach you everything, or I will be able to give you some resources for you to learn how to code, or for you to get this 6-figure role, or whatever it might be. Be wary of that. Always, when you are taking information from people, vet them. There's no harm in looking at their LinkedIn to see what they actually do. There's no harm in checking their Twitter account. There's no harm in, you know, asking those questions, you know, research into them first. Because sometimes when something is too good to be true, it really is. I always say just tread with caution. Unfortunately, I think as being in tech has been coming up as a trend a lot in the last year or so, so that a lot more people have kind of been like, I want to get into tech, I want to get into tech, I want to get into tech. And then unfortunately, you have people that try and capitalize off of that and use people for that and mislead people too. So I've seen stories of people that have given money for resources, and it's money that they really needed, you know, and it's like, you know, I think that sometimes a lot of the questions that you might have or want to ask can be something that literally can be asked in a tweet. And you can use the hashtag Black Tech Twitter, which is what I use a lot. And you can just ask the question and you'll be surprised how people will come and help, because that's what community is. And they won't charge you. They won't tell you to send them money on Cash App or something. They want to help. They want to give the resources. But just do be wary and ask the questions again. That's where it comes up again. Ask the questions and research them before you give any money. And also ask yourself why you're giving them the money. Yeah. Is it that you're expecting them to get you a job, or is it that you're paying for the resources that you'll eventually have to learn for yourself? Because some of the resources that they're charging you for are websites that are free, you know, that anyone can find. So just be wary. And before you ask questions, ask yourself, like, it's very important because tech is broad. Tech is an industry, but tech can also mean technical roles. And within technical roles, there's an abundance of roles, from cybersecurity to front end of development to DevOps engineering to cloud engineering. There's loads. Every single one of those requires different tools, different languages, different things that you will need to learn and understand and familiarize yourself with. It's important that you think about the role that you want to go for, so that when you ask the question, you can go on Twitter and just ask the question. Be like, hey, I want to be a site reliability engineer. Where should I start? Right. I want to do this project. What do you think? Twitter is I always recommend Twitter because that's the best place to be when it comes to engaging with the tech community, particularly the Black tech community. They're all there. That's how I made a lot of my connections. They're all there. You use that hashtag Black tech Twitter. And if you have a question, I guarantee you someone will reply. I guarantee you that someone will help you and be able to direct you in the right way. But don't be afraid to ask, because sometimes people are paying for things that they shouldn't be paying for. So yeah, just be wary and give yourself grace, be patient. If you are like me and you are neurodivergent, it's not a deficit. You can get into tech, you can get into whatever role you want to do. It doesn't have to be a technical role. It can be a non-technical role. And you can also create a role for yourself. You can build something from the ground up for yourself. But there's a space for you, no matter what. But don't look at any of that as a deficit. It's a gift within ourselves. It's a challenge being neurodivergent, but there's gifts that come with it. We look at the world so differently that it's such a benefit when you are able to join an organization and to be able to lend that way of looking at the world and that way of thinking to help them to build their products and improve things within their organizations. It helps. So yeah, don't be ashamed of it.
Yes, and that's where we get the diversity in thought and process, right? Is with someone neurodivergent. So that is definitely, like you mentioned, not a deficit. Well, Jennifer, I appreciate your time today. So much wonderful information for this podcast. I'm so happy I was able to have you on. And I'm excited for individuals who want to get into DevOps engineering or just listening and want to ask more questions. For those listening, I just know this is going to be a great episode. So appreciate you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem.
I can make my world come true. All my dreams will see me through. And if that will get me down, my dreams will turn things all around. With a smile upon my face, I can see a better place. Doesn't matter what blow. I can